Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back for this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. And we've got a bit more space in the afternoon for Q&A and for discussion. And I should pick up the iPad whilst I'm there. A quick reminder, please. So as we have a bit more time, please do use Slido, put some questions into the Q&A. Huge thank you for Phoenix for supporting, and Phoenix Insights for supporting the whole conference today, being an overall conference sponsor. And we've got some really exciting plans to do some really great work with Phoenix and with Catherine. So we may or may not talk about that, Catherine. Really, really grateful, and they have been a long-term supporter of ILC. Please do tweet about the conference, tag us at ILC UK, and use the hashtag Future of Aging. So the first session this afternoon, we're going to be shifting the focus to talk a little bit about skills and jobs and learning and workplaces, and really, really delighted to welcome, to sort of kick off the conversation, Lord Woolley, who's the principal at Homerton College in Cambridge. So, Lord Woolley.
Thank you very much, David, and good afternoon to you all. I've been given a number of tasks, but one of those tasks has been to keep you awake in the afternoon after lunch. So let's see where we go with that. I want to thank Emily and David and our team for having this important conversation. I guess this conversation could go many places, and they'd all be interesting. But I'm gonna start off, and I'm gonna start off, if you like, at the end of my talk. So I start off at the end and then see where we go from there. And at the end, I'd like to give you maybe some soundbite advice. So, advice number one, and I'll try and be as radical as I can. Don't retire. I mean it. Don't retire. Advice number two, particularly in this aging process, I would argue that you need to be bolder and braver, perhaps as you've never been before. Think about that for a second. Bolder and braver than you've ever been before. And the third argument, the third piece that I want to say as part of this conversation and in this argument about aging, that be aware, even as we age and even as we adapt in a very changing, sometimes brave new world, discriminatory practices can still occur. And that can be particularly so for Black, Asian, minority, ethnic communities. When I came here, I was chatting to one or two of the delegates, and I spoke to somebody I think is quite eminent in this area. At least that's what he said. And I said, "What's your take on retirement?" And he said to me, "There are four." Where are you, Paul? Just wave your hands. There's Paul, the eminent person in this area. He said there are 4 stages of retirement. I wonder if you know them. Stage 1, euphoria. Stage 2, depression. Stage 3, an acknowledgement that you've got to do something different. At stage 4, doing something different. Paul, is that about right? There you go. And that's why I'm saying just don't retire. Look, I'll give you my little bit of a backstory and see if it chimes into why I gave those conclusions. I'm nearly 61. I'll be 61 on Christmas Eve. As a Christmas baby, which any of you know that's been born around that time, you got one present for the 2 dates. That makes you tough, trust me. 61. And when I was 60, I started a brand new career, but completely different. So for 30 years, I'd been an activist, fighting for social and racial justice. I saw myself as a disciple of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think we made great strides, by the way. When we started Operation Black Vote, there were 4 Black Asian minority ethnic MPs. 4. Bernie Grant, Diane Abbott, Keith Vaz, and Paul Botang. Now there are 64. And an Asian Prime Minister. We even had a black chancellor for 5 minutes. But that's not the point. The point was that nobody batted an eyelid that he was black. So we made great change in those 25 or 26 years. And I loved my job. I loved nurturing talent. I loved seeing institutions changed. I loved badgering politicians. Now I am one. Making a difference. And then someone came knocking on the door and said, Simon Woolley, would you like a career change? I was comfortable with what I was doing. But you know what I thought? If I don't do it now, then when? And so I said, okay, I'll do it, or at least I'll try to do it. So as David said, today I'm the head of Oxbridge College. I'm proud to say the first black man of Oxbridge College. I have 1,100 students, 250 staff. And I kept saying to myself, oh my gosh, what have I done? I'm not even an academic. Do they know I'm not an academic? It doesn't matter. Here's the thing, that we take our backstory, we take our learnings, and we can transfer them to so many different areas. I'll be honest with you, they're loving me in this space. Why? Because I'm doing things different. I'm doing things that most academics just wouldn't think about, because that's what academics do, one thing, the particular way. I'm doing something that is just, I don't know, crazy bonkers. But it's working. So here's the point about this transition. Often we get told, have a career, stay in your lane, and then retire and do some gardening or do golf. And this is the other thing about age. And you have to stop me, you have to trip me up, because I'm on a roll now. I'm on a Martin Luther King roll. That I passionately believe that age is a number, is a construct that in many ways pigeonholes us to think and believe in a certain way. So for generations we were told at 65 you retire and then do your gardening or your golf. Rather than at 60 or 65, there's a myriad of opportunities for you to feel wonderfully alive. Here's the other thing about this age construct that I would argue that shackles us into these boxes. You know what happens when you get to a particular age and your knees start to ache. You say to yourself, I can't run anymore. And then you stop running. And then when you stop running, you stop doing a lot of other active things. Rather than saying, I can't run like I used to, but I can do so many other things. You see, when you do that, it turns the age thing on its head, because you no longer accept these are the barriers. I can't do this and I can't do that. I'm nearly 61 and I think I can do anything. And I know that I can't, but I can try to do many things as a consequence. And there are a lot of science now out there. We're doing a bit of science in Cambridge about what is your physical age, your actual age, and what is your biological age. And I think that if you look at your biological age and see all these parameters where you can do something about it to lower the aspects that don't work for us, then we can be in better health for very much longer. You'll be pleased to know that the results of my biological age, 61 my actual age, or nearly 51 my biological age. And I'm not done with that. It's not as though that I want to live forever, but I want to live better. I want to live in good health. My final point is this, is that if we turn these things on their head, that we can do many more things that we think we can do. We can do physically many more things that we think we can do. Then there's a kaleidoscope of opportunities that might be open for us. But we mustn't let discriminatory barriers stop certain communities fulfilling those possibilities. We know in education there are racial discriminatory barriers for kids. We know that. We know often when black children's exams are marked blind, they do better. And that carries on into the workplace. It carries on into housing and health. In this brave new world, when we can be older better, let's make sure that those minority communities have the same opportunities as everybody else as we go into this job space, as we go into this can-do culture. So, what are the three things? Don't retire. Flip the switch when it comes to age, which will allow you to be bold and brave and to think of all the things that you thought you couldn't do, but Simon says that you really can. And then when we really can and we do it together, let's make sure we've got no, or at least very, very few, if not none at all, discriminatory barriers. Thank you all very much.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you very much. And one of my friends who you may probably do know, Delroy Coronaldi, has been doing some brilliant work around ethnicity and football managers. And it's one of the things really striking is, and of course, football players, they stop relatively young, and the what do you do midlife is extraordinarily interesting and challenging question. But actually, whilst there are lots of black footballers, there are almost no black managers. There is only, I think it's 2006 since we last had a black referee. So we had huge sort of embedded racism still in certain bits of the world, which I think shows that whilst my positiveness earlier around we have made progress, there are still things to do. So the session, we've got plenty of time this afternoon, and Lord Woolley does need to leave at certain points, so I've just said sort of sneak off. I've also asked my colleagues on the panel to basically just try and chat between themselves, so I can just sit here and sit back a bit so you don't have to hear as much from me. And I'm going to kick off by a very late addition, our friend Kate, who has worked with ILC for a long time, to start off talking a bit about the sort of context of work. And Les, who I think is probably still here, has just done a really interesting piece of work that shows over the next 10 years we're going to have a shortage of 2.8 million workers in the UK just because of demographic change. If you take account of the move to part-time work and incorporate the potential of ill health, it might be closer to 5 million. We've got a huge skills challenge out there, which we, in terms of simply the number of people we're going to need, but also a real important question around the sort of skills our economy needs and how do we maximise the skills that we all have and improve the opportunities we all have to continue to work. So I was going to start off with and ask Kate to kick off in terms of the slightly broader point around work and workplaces, and then hopefully we'll move on to a bit more of a conversation around midlife, careers, and so on. Kate.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to be here. Nice to be up here. I wasn't expecting to be, but it's great. I think one of the things that I was just reflecting on as Simon was talking, and you were expecting that note of optimism about the change in political representation for black people over 25 years, is is that I feel a bit less optimistic about some issues around age diversity. So I've been talking about age diverse workforces now for about 20 years. So I started as one of the younger workers, and I'm edging close to being one of the older workers and still having the same conversation. And I think that that's telling, because all the conversations we've been having today have referenced this issue about this shortage of workers and economic inactivity, and the fact that we are in genuine trouble if we, as a nation, but also as individuals, as communities, if we cannot support more people in later life to work effectively. And yet the reality of that is that will mean more age diverse workforces, more age diverse workplaces, and we're still not normal about that. We still don't find that a normal way of working. We still haven't thought properly about what it means to support people to age at work and to do that comfortably and effectively. And that's why we're seeing more and more people dropping out the workforce, because the future of work has to be a future in which the issues that affect us as we age are accommodated in the workplace. And that isn't just about not being directly ageist and not thinking that we can only have staff who are vibrant, which is a code for youth, or dynamic as a code for youth. But it's also about making space for people who have hearing loss or sight loss, or who increasingly have to combine their own care needs and the care needs of people around them with work. And one of the things that I'm very struck by is I was really lucky when I started talking about ageing, and I worked at Help the Aged, is we did have an age diverse workforce in that office at the time, and that was my kind of quite early introduction to work, and it was wonderful. But it did mean that we did have to kind of allow somebody to have a sort of quieter desk over here where there wasn't so much noise, because it interfered with her working environment. And we did see people popping out to care or to have periods of time away from work. And I find it quite sad that we haven't got there in terms of making that more of the norm. But I think that the need is now urgent. And so, I think there's lots of skills that we will need, and people have mentioned the word skills a lot, and there have been lots of throwing to this panel to do all the work in actually filling in all of those gaps. But one of the skills we need is flexibility. All of us need flexibility, and we need flexibility in our management skills. We need flexibility in our approach to working, because that is what was the number one thing that would enable people to work longer. So, those are just a few of my reflections on what's been said so far.
I'm going to take you at your word, David, just sort of jump in. Is that right? Is that on?
Yeah.
So if anybody doesn't know me, my name's Catherine Foote. I work for the largest pensions and savings company in the UK, Phoenix. Having joined them last year from the Centre for Ageing Better, and I'm establishing a new think tank inside Phoenix to think about how can we support more people across the UK to be in a better position in terms of their financial security as they reach their later life. And fundamental to that is this conversation about enabling people to stay in work that suits them, that's fulfilling for them, and that enables them to continue to earn money for longer. So I'm delighted to be here, and I just, absolutely, this is going to be another of these, let's all violently agree with each other panels, I think, isn't it? But I would agree with you, Kate, and say that we did some work recently on this phenomenon that gets called in the papers the Great Retirement, this exit of people over 50, particularly post-pandemic, from the labour market, people who are not returning. Now, part of the reason people in this age group aren't able to come back into the workforce after, for instance, having been on furlough and then perhaps being left the labour market after that, is to do with access to healthcare and issues around long-term and short-term temporary sickness. But actually, when you do look at this particular age group, 50 to 64, and we can have another conversation about why on earth are labour market statistics stopping at 64 all the time, I think, in this context. But if you do look at that age group and you explore that group of people that left post-pandemic, although health is driving some of their challenges in returning, when you look at the surveys from ONS, and we've done our own work comparing people in the UK and in other countries too quite recently, what they're describing is dissatisfaction with their workplace, a feeling like they're not supported at work, a feeling like work doesn't work for them. And it would appear, if you look internationally, that workers in the UK have been more deeply affected by their experience of furlough and of the pandemic and of the economy stopping for 18 months, and have reassessed what role work plays in their lives more fundamentally, perhaps, than others have in other countries. And unfortunately, are left deciding that pros and cons list of staying in work or not just has tipped into not. And we're seeing this exodus now from the labour market. And I think, people talk now, most recently, about, well, don't worry, because we'll see this, the great unretirement will be the next phenomenon we'll see, because thanks to the cost of living crisis, they'll all be in such dire straits that they'll just have to get back into work. And that may be true, but that will be hard, because people do face age discrimination when they're applying for jobs and returning to the labour market. If jobs and workplaces don't adapt and become flexible, which of course is a benefit for people of all ages, not least older workers, then that ability to unretire is not really going to be available in the numbers I don't think we're going to need. So I totally agree that workplaces are, and the role that workplaces play in creating environments that enable all sorts of different people of all sorts of different ages and backgrounds to thrive at work is going to be absolutely critical. I just also, though, add, just to bring in some of the skills conversation perhaps, what you were saying, that phrase you used, Simon, of don't stay in your lane, I think, and in your experience of career switching. Keir Starmer at the CBI conference earlier this week stood on his platform and said, I can speak from personal experience that switching career in your 50s can be a really good move. Normalising an ability to not stay in your lane and to think about having multiple careers and multiple jobs over a life course is so critical, I think, to this agenda. And critical also then to achieving that is normalising access to adult education. So 25 years ago, Tony Blair's sort of big election promise, what did he say he was all about back in 95, 96? Education, education, and education, my top 3 political priorities. Actually, he meant access to university and he meant schools, didn't he? And particularly schools. And we're in a different world now. 50 years ago, of course, we had the founding of the Open University. So I think we need to perhaps look, not 25 years ago, but 50 years ago, to be thinking about how can we instill, a revolution in adult education and access to skills in this country. The talk is there. The talk is endless. Now, suddenly, growth means skills. Growth will require skills. This high skills, high growth economy that we're all desperately aspiring will be the sunlit uplands of the future of the UK. But most people who are going to be in the workforce in 2040, 2050, they're already grown-ups. They're already in the workforce. And I don't really see that rhetoric yet translate to really significant action. We were talking about these, the Healthy Aging Grand Challenge, and it's kind of, let's all agree, like bonkers ambitious 5 years improvement in healthy life expectancy goal. That made it into the Levelling Up white paper, didn't it? That commitment. There was a skills one in that Levelling Up white paper too. That was pretty pathetic in comparison. So this bizarre contrast of kind of insanely heroic ambition on health inequalities and really modest commitments around adult education and skills.
Yeah, and I, of course, would completely agree with that point. I'm Naomi Clayton. I'm Deputy Director at the Learning and Work Institute. We are a research and policy organisation dedicated to supporting lifelong learning, full employment and social inclusion. And I completely agree with the issues that Catherine's raised around the importance of kind of adult education and ensuring people have access to opportunities to develop their skills, to retrain. We know that there are lots of barriers to people who have decided or left the labour market and currently not looking for work. There are lots of barriers to them returning to work. one of the issues is skills. So I think from the over 50s survey, 1 in 4 people who have left work, not currently looking for work, but would consider going back to work, 1 in 4 don't feel that they have the right skills to find a job. And of course, we know that skills and the ability to upskill and retrain is really important and becoming increasingly important as these days, you know, people starting off in work will be embarking a lot of the time on a 50-year career. So there needs to be opportunities to reskill and upskill. But at the same time, our investment as a country in adult education has been falling over the longer term. And yes, we've seen some increasing investment from government in adult skills, but by 24-25, the adult education budget is likely to be around over £1 billion smaller than 2010-11. So we've seen a huge drop in our investment in adult education, and as a result, we've seen significant falls in people actually participating in FE and adult skills courses too. And there's been a particularly large drop for people in those older age groups. So people over 50, there's been, I think, the people, older people participating in FE and skills courses has almost halved since 2016. So there's kind of growing need for more opportunities to reskill and upskill, but actually fewer and fewer people are actually getting that opportunity.
I was just going to ask Simon, if I might, what's the age profile like of your students, and what do you think about age diversity amongst our student population?
No, I totally agree with lifelong learning, and I think we should all embrace that. Now, of course, it's not straightforward because it can be costly, but there are ways to do it without the heavy costs, and I think we're all better off for it. That we've got to instill this idea that diversity is our greatest strength, diversity in all its areas. And I think that often you get to a particular age and people are trying to say, okay, well, let's bring in the young people. Well, it doesn't have to be either or. I mean, sometimes it is, but it doesn't always have to be. And I think the other thing is that in regards to an aging population, actually the government would like that people like myself and older to continue working, because if we don't, who's going to pay? That's the sharp reality. But if you flip it and say, well, hang on a second, it's not just about you wanting to cut the tax bill. But what you really want to do is to use the skills, use the energy. And I think that if we create a society in which values people working at an older age and utilizing all the years of knowledge and skills for a new vibrant generation and time, here's the thing. We all benefit. It's not that you lose, you win and you lose. If we get this right, we all win. But you've got to acknowledge it, and you've got to have a plan to implement it.
Absolutely. George on the panel earlier was talking about sort of scaling small businesses and interventions that can work. And I think I would say, you know, that's a relevant message in this space too. There are answers out there actually about, you know, people doing fantastic work to support adults of all ages who may have thought that education was not for them, that school was not a place they wanted to go back to, education was not an environment they wanted to go back to begin to enable people to regain confidence in the prospect of learning. There are people doing great work in careers advice and career support, enabling people to reflect on their skills at different points in life. But at the moment, you know, the sort of state institutions here are absent. And we have, for instance, in the employment sector, you know, Job Centre Pluses, great big monolith, essentially solving a problem that we no longer have in the UK labour market. We've got really low rates of unemployment. So I think scaling what we actually already know can work for people and engaging government in what we need to do for 21st century education, 21st century labour market, I think is critical. So when George said, you can scale things that are service innovations, that are kind of person to person, doesn't all need to be about tech, I thought that was music to my ears.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because you will know this more update, but one of the things that I think is important is that the learning that we do and the skill development that we do is not necessarily always formal, and some of it's also provided by employers. And I think there's long been evidence that employers are pretty poor at ensuring that you continue to have access. So I think there's a lot, and I know Phoenix is doing some work in this area, but around how do you kind of change the conversation that people have with their staff to recognise how long a career is, to stop having a conversation that pretends that we will, do one job through our lives and it's all very linear. And I think, those sorts of conversations around skills that enable people to think differently about what they might need to do, how they might need to shift things, are really pretty critical to making some of these issues kind of more surmountable.
Yeah, I think one of the positive developments from DWP is the midlife MOTs, and they're about to kind of trial kind of midlife MOTs through employers in 3 areas, and I think there's an important role for those types of kind of reviews. Learning and Work, back in the days when we were NIACE, came up with the idea of kind of midlife career reviews and trialled and evaluated those. And they were kind of found to be really important in terms of helping individuals to understand their employment and kind of training opportunities, helping them understand kind of what career options there were. And there were some really positive outcomes that weren't just limited to employment and earnings, but also health and well-being. So, I think there are some kind of positive developments, but I completely agree about the importance of the role of employers in this space, both in terms of attracting people back into the workforce and giving people kind of more flexible opportunities to kind of return to work, and in terms of employers' investment in skills and workforce development. The trends there have been heading in the wrong direction for a long time. Of course, we've seen, employer investment decline with, the kind of uncertainty created by kind of Brexit, the kind of pandemic, and, employers are grappling with kind of ongoing issues of the impacts of the pandemic and kind of cost of living, doing business crisis at the moment. But they play a hugely important role in that employer, in terms of workforce investment. But we need to do more to try and reverse those declines in employer investment and address some of the inequalities in access to training in the workplace too.
Yes, I'm sorry I've got to interrupt. I have to leave. I have a college meeting on Zoom. So don't forget my mantra, don't retire. And be bold and brave. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Sam. And we've got lots and lots of questions on here, but I'm enjoying the fact that I'm just getting to listen for a change. But let me pick up one. There's a couple of questions about Phoenix, and I think we were sort of leaning in then to a conversation around careers advice. And I know at Phoenix Group there were plans to do some work around, I don't know if it's midlife MOT-careers, but actually, if we think there is a role for employers, sort of, how can they lead the way, Catherine? So from a Phoenix point of view, perhaps, and then more broadly.
Absolutely. If anyone can come up with a better name than midlife MOT, isn't that just awful? You can, forgive me, David, but you can tell the kind of age and gender of the person that came up with that name. But the idea, the concept at the heart of it is a really good one. that, you know, there's a point when you're, you know, feel like you're a proper grown-up, when you need to be given a moment's pause and reflection to think about the potential for you to be working for 25, 30 more years, and whether the path that you're currently on is the path you want to continue to be on, or whether, as Simon was saying, you know, you want to think differently and switch and divert and make a change, and to be supported to think about that, not just in the context, what the midlife reviews do is not just put that in the context purely of careers advice, but also about your broader health and well-being and your personal finances too, and what you can be thinking about in terms of what you can afford. So yes, Phoenix is currently running midlife MOTs for our colleagues, just at the foothills really of rolling that out. I think it's an intervention with a lot of potential, although of course not necessarily an intervention that will immediately pay off for the employer, or that will entirely pay off with the employer. The sort of intervention that could lead people to leave, of course, and decide to do something else. So I think there's, you know, complex mix of incentives, and on employer investment in skills, you know, essentially we have a sector, I think, that is in sort of economics jargon is kind of free riding on this assumption that, you know, skilled workers will just come to them, and they don't need to pay for it. Hence this declining investment in employer investment in skills, and, you know, use of the apprenticeships ending up, as you were sort of perhaps hinting at, Kate, there, you know, leaning towards, you know, the higher paid workforce, not really addressing some of the issues that we perhaps need the apprentice levy to address. So I definitely think there are nudges and things you can do, and legislation you can be thinking about to encourage employers, but this broad cultural shift that education just has to be something that we all start taking seriously, and whether we're an employer, an individual, or the state, is, I think, at the heart of it.
Yeah. I guess within the employer investment space, and related to the point about apprenticeships, we did some work recently looking at, so, you know, obviously there's been a lot of investment in apprenticeships, a lot of focus from government on apprenticeships, and you know, we've seen some changes with the apprenticeship levy. But we've also seen quite a lot of underspend, and quite a lot of apprentices not completing their apprenticeships. And we did some work recently and surveying apprentices. 37% of those had withdrawn from their apprenticeship early. The most common reasons why they withdrew was that they weren't getting enough support from their employer, and that they had too high a workload. So essentially people are taking on apprenticeships, which could lead to really positive employment and progression opportunities, but they're being required to kind of do them in the sidelines, and not necessarily being given the support to actually complete the training required, and being given the support within the kind of workplace and by their kind of line managers and employers to complete apprenticeships. And I do think that's also a really big issue when we're thinking about, you know, where do those kind of skills and development opportunities lie for the workforce as a whole, but also older workers. And so I think we need a conversation about the quality of the on-the-job experience too when it comes to apprenticeships.
Yeah, and I think the challenge around that Catherine highlighted around, even for big companies, if it's not clear what your return on investment is going to be, and there's a question here about the gig economy. Clearly, if people aren't working for huge companies, where does the investment come from in terms of learning, and who makes that investment? And there are, you know, coming back to the point around innovation, some really interesting sort of apps where Deliveroo drivers can learn in bite-sized 2-minute chunks while they're waiting for pickups and things. So I think that there is some really interesting innovation out there. And you know, I suppose sort of just, you know, it sort of strikes me that there really are some opportunities here. But actually, how do you get a care provider to invest in learning when they think that the turnover of the staff is going to be so high that they're not going to see the return of that?
I mean, the thing that just struck me across a couple of comments is, and also I've been being a bit honest with myself about, as I've been listening to what people say, is sometimes I think we listen to conversations like that and I hear Simon say things like, don't retire, and I think, yeah, but I want to. Like, and I wonder how many of us, kind of went, yeah, that sounds really cool, but like, don't really internalise it and I don't mean it. And I think we still have got a massive, the penny just still hasn't dropped with a lot of us, and therefore the employers that we work for and create, that this really is a huge, huge shift that we're going to have to make massive, massive changes for. And it will mean doing things very, very differently. And I mean, I haven't got any answers on this, because it comes back to this failure to sort of internalise or recognise the ageing of society and what that really will mean in terms of how we're going to have to live, learn, work, etc. But it really is very clear that if you sit, the last time I sat around with a group of employers who weren't completely sold on this, which is often who you'd get near, but this was a slightly wider group, that any conversation about an ageing population was just not something that was touching the radar. We really got to kind of still break down some very, very fundamental barriers and keep explaining that these changes are real. And the graphs of doom about, these huge gaps in the workforce, I kind of hope that they might help this conversation happen.
Yeah. Although, of course, to be honest, we do have to recognise, I think, that when you do look at that newly economically inactive population, in the spirit of your comment, Kate, that the future is not going to be the same as the past, that group of people are significantly more likely to own their home outright and have been on a defined benefit pension. So that is a generation for whom some of that exit from the labour market is driven from a point of financial capability, of financial resilience, that future generations on defined contribution pensions who have not made it onto the housing ladder. Already we're seeing predictions of about, a third of people maybe, future generations, still privately renting in retirement unless we do something about our housing market. That future is unlikely to be, that future of the option of early exit from the labour market, of retirement, is unlikely to be a reality. But exactly as you say, we surveyed 16,500 people recently about all sorts of things, but one of them was when do you expect to retire, and if so, give us an age. When do you think you're going to retire? And the younger you are, the younger you think you're going to retire. The group in the population with the youngest hoped for retirement age was young, higher income, people from higher income families and on higher incomes themselves, expecting an average retirement age in that age group of about 61. So yes, I think the sort of expectation-reality gap is enormous, and I think the ways in which these sorts of events. I love coming to the ILC conference every year, David. I think it's fabulous. But I'm always left feeling like we are always violently agreeing with each other, and the issue here is how I think, Kate, we successfully managed to break some of these messages and some of these predictions and some of these issues outside of this network of people who, as you say, even if all talk about it, and even ourselves, exactly as you say, internally might not even quite believe it.
And that sort of linked into Kate's "we all secretly want to retire" point. Actually, Naomi, how much of the issues around learning are sort of demand side versus supply side? So actually, how much of it is us convincing people of the value of learning? On the one hand, my sense is when you talk to people of all classes and background, people say, "I'd really love to learn that. I'd really love to do that. I'd really love to." But actually, we know that there are groups who don't take opportunities when they get them. So I don't know. What do you think? How much is it demand versus supply? What's it with both?
Well, inevitably, it's a mix of both, and I think there is something about, in terms of raising awareness of the kind of opportunities and the potential, and for in terms of the benefits that kind of learning and kind of undertaking kind of training opportunities can bring. I do think there is something about kind of communicating those benefits and really kind of putting that in the context of people's lives and where they are in their lives currently, and kind of thinking about, you know, how might it help them. I mean, that's why it's so important in, you know, employment support, for instance, which, you know, historically hasn't worked particularly well for older people, and at the moment, as Catherine's saying, is kind of designed for a problem that we haven't really got, and actually, you know, only I think one in 10 over 50s who are out of work get employment support. But the point is that support needs to be kind of tailored. It also needs to include kind of opportunities to kind of train and retrain and upskill, and all of that has to be put into the context of people's lives in terms of. So I do think it's really, really important to kind of communicate the kind of potential benefits.
But I'd agree the demand side is, you know, it is, as you say, it's a vicious cycle of a failure of both supply and demand. We did some work, though, with people in their 40s, 50s and 60s in declining industries, in kind of left behind parts of the UK recently, talking to them about lifelong learning and adult education, and exploring how they felt about it and what it would take to get them to think about reskilling and retraining and career switching. And inevitably, what they told us was, you know, a very sensible calculation that they just didn't buy, that the risk would pay off, that the cost would pay off, that with, you know, mortgages or rental payments or dependent children or aging parents, the prospect of investing for themselves in a course where they didn't see that clear connection to the local new job at the end of it. They didn't have the confidence that an employer at the end of that qualification would look at them and think that they could do that job and give them that job. Without that, they make, you know, I think a super rational calculation that it's just probably not worth it. And so I think in terms of the supply side, I think that's something we really need to get much better at. Providing the sorts of information that adults will need, that frankly younger people coming out of school sort of just trust and need less, that will demonstrate that courses and qualifications will enable them to access new local jobs. Yeah. And that chain of information is just totally absent.
Yeah. One of the things that, Catherine knows about this because I did it with the Centre for Ageing Better, but when I did some work on volunteering and older adults, a lot of the way that we sell volunteering is to tell people they'll develop skills. And when we talk to older adults about, you know, the various messages they got about why volunteering might be a good idea, a lot of them said that this sort of like, oh, you know, we'll give you a certificate in X, Y, Z was actually, you know, quite patronising, because I have lots of skills. You know, I'm 50 plus, I've had 50 years of experience on this planet. You know, I'd like you to use my skills rather than try and give me some different ones. And I think that was, we are pretty, it strikes me that there's a lot of that we could do in terms of thinking about how we kind of recognise skills and draw people in based around the fact that they actually bring some skills in the first place. And maybe you want to formalise them, or maybe you want to put a different wrap around them. But the group that really, really stay with me is, you know, if you have been a carer for somebody, you have developed so many skills. Some of them are practical caring skills, but also just the sheer resilience and the ability to deal with mountains of admin and find your way through labyrinthine systems. Those are enormous skills. And yet it's really hard for former carers to get back into the workplace. How, you know, that feels to me like such an area of potential to kind of create a mechanism for really, you know, grabbing onto those skills and helping people feel really positive about what that gives them as a set of assets to take back into the workforce. And I know there are some places that appoint former carers as carers, but that's not the only set of skills you develop. Like I say, there's all that admin, there's all that resilience, there's all that kind of lateral thinking that goes on when you're supporting someone. So that for me is one of the areas that I think we need to get better at. You know, this, if we're going to fill that employment gap, it's going to be about getting people who are sick, who are carers, in the workplace, happy and enjoying their work. And that is going to look different to what we do now. So I think we just need to start being a bit creative about it.
I completely agree with that. I think there's a massive, I mean, we've spoken a lot about, you know, kind of, training opportunities and investment in skills, I think there's a massive issue in terms of how people's skills are used within the workplace. And I think that relates to the quality of work and job opportunities too. So, we know that 1 in 6 people over the age of 50 are earning less than the living wage. We know that older workers are less likely to progress in the workplace too. But of course, quality of work isn't just about pay and progression. It's about, kind of flexibility. It's about, voice within the workplace. It's about so many things. But I absolutely agree that, these conversations need to be about the use of people's skills and the quality of job opportunities, and how we support people to access better jobs.
No, absolutely. And I just want to sort of just push us a bit around. So those of you under 30, I won't ask how many of us are under 30 here, probably won't realise or remember that sort of there was a time when adult learning was free. So when I was 19, I did a photography class, I did a swimming class, while I was doing my A-levels, all paid for by the local authority. You could literally go to your local authority, say, I want to do course X, and do it. And actually people used to do it, and it gradually sort of, got smaller and smaller, and grants got smaller. And now if you're in London, that same photography class for 10 weeks, you might have to pay £500 for. And actually, when I used to work with NICE, it was around informal adult learning, and one of the arguments we very strongly made was, look, actually, this is a route into something else, whether it be around numeracy, whether it around... I met an older lady who was an Uber driver, who was also someone who designed clothes. And she, in this 5-minute conversation in America, she basically said, look, I do this stuff. And she showed me photos when we got to the event. And she said, basically, I know how to do this. I'm really good at doing it. I don't know how to set this up as a business. And all she really needed was a 3-week course in how to set up a business, but no real provision in the US to do that. So any thoughts around informal learning and how this might fit into midlife?
Just listening to you talk, David, I'm struck by a sort of parallel, if you like, between this conversation about investment and commitment around adult education and skills, formal and informal, FE or workplace delivered, and the earlier conversation comparing kind of acute healthcare and the social care system. And actually, so I think some of the answers lie in similar places. So I think, earlier today we were talking about, well, we need to build demand. That conversation about social care and Richard's call for, a kind of, mass public deliberation about the importance and the value of this of social care in our lives. We need to think about how we build demand, I think, for adult education skills and enable people to see that it's worth having, and that we should demand better of our systems. I think similarly, we've also talked just now about the economic case and how that's never quite makes it. I think it's funny, isn't it, that I think, we're seeing a strange environment at the moment, I think, where we're sort of right at the top of government, sort of number 10, Prime Minister and Keir Starmer on the other side, saying skills, it's all about skills. But actually, if you're Secretary of State for Education, it's still schools, because you can make such, you can really draw that clear line between investment and outcomes. You just put some money in per pupil funding, you know what you're doing, you know what you're going to get, and you know you're going to get votes at the end of it. So I think actually there's an interesting parallel, I suppose I was just reflecting, to be drawn between these two sort of Cinderella elements of their respective social policy systems.
Yeah. And interesting, talk about kind of informal learning. At Learning and Work, we've run participation in adult kind of lifelong learning for the last 26 years. In the last couple of years, we've seen a positive trend in more people participating in learning. But a lot of that has been driven by kind of shifts to online learning and informal learning. So a positive trend overall, but I guess it does, and it kind of, I think, highlights the opportunity that kind of online learning and kind of technological development brings in terms of, improving access to like education and learning opportunities. But I guess there were questions around, the quality of that, what currency that gives people in the labour market, because we know that quite often formal qualifications have, you know, more currency with employers. But yeah, it feels like an opportunity, but you know, it's ensuring that people have access to kind of quality learning opportunities. It might mean in some cases that those opportunities need to be kind of blended more. But yeah.
Is the sort of, you know, again, pushing back on the innovation, some opportunities for, you know, mixing the online and the offline. So, for example, you can frankly do an MBA on YouTube now, from the extent to which all of the, you know, probably Harvard, you know, all the lectures are online. You can sit and watch them. They'll also give you the reading list. What they won't give you is the group of 8 people to sit together and work, and they won't give you, you know, that won't give you the assessment. Actually, is there a way you could mix the online and offline to create really interesting hybrid, much cheaper, much more accessible learning for all of us?
Could be. I don't think that course design is at the heart of it. I think there's lots you can do there, absolutely. I'm sure. But I think there are some more fundamental issues. I don't think it's the quality of the sort of delivery offer that is at the heart of this failure, although I'm sure it's an element of it. So I think in terms of innovation, I think one of the big things that's lacking would be at, you know, at a local level. And you do see this in some parts, some of the big combined authorities actually, but really innovative joined up working between the local employers and the local further education, private training providers, through things like local skills partnerships, so that you are actually able to design a sort of place-based system of adult education and lifelong learning that does this job I was mentioning before of connecting potential learners with potential jobs via further education and education. That's the sort of chain that's missing, and I think where innovation is most needed.
But I mean, I think also employment support. I mean, we probably don't need to innovate because I think we know the sorts of things that work. We just don't really do them. But I mean, you're going back the sort of 25 years of the conference backward look. But you know, in that period, we did see a bit of development of starting to have, you know, new deal for over 50s and things like that. All of that's died a death. But it's very, very clear we're going to have a different model of employment support, which is proactive, essentially. You know, this kind of idea that we're going to close any of these gaps by just sitting there and hoping for the great unretirement is pretty delusional. And I think, you know, so employment support is going to have to be part of it. And in order for that to be proactive and attractive to people, it will have to bring in skills development. It will have to bring in, you know, a direct access to employers, so you are closing that loop so that you can see that if I do this course, I might actually get a job. And I think that's probably one of the areas where, yeah, like I say, it may not be like completely new innovation, but it is possibly about scaling up some of the things that we've tried and stopped doing.
Just echo the importance of joining things up, and I think that's where, you know, the role of, you know, combined authorities, local authorities is so important, because it's not just about, you know, joining up employment support with training opportunities and with employers, but also looking at things like health and transport, because they can quite often be barriers to employment and learning too. So, you know, I think there's huge opportunity, and we'll see what happens with the next round of devolution deals. I think, you know, there will be a large element of those that include things around skills and possibly employment support. But there's huge opportunity to join things up better and to innovate in this space.
Absolutely, but I think you're right, Kate, that in the workplace, we don't really need to innovate. We just need more people to do it, do the right things. You know, of 25 years in the future, or quite frankly, I would obviously hope much more soon into the future than that. I would want there not to be news that McDonald's is hiring older workers, or what was it this week? Halfords is hiring older mechanics. You know, that those of us in this sort of 50-plus employment space can no longer just list off B&Q, McDonald's, and now Halfords, but because there are so many of them, because we just don't need to think about it in that way. I think you're absolutely right. So again, I guess the question then is, how do you? And I have a fear that, if you like, we're sort of still relying on an equivalent of sort of trickle-down theory, that as long as large employers who are super committed, like Phoenix and others, really get everything right and show the world how they're doing everything right, that somehow will trickle down. I'm not sure necessarily that it will. So I think thinking about more powerful interventions that could really catalyse commitment from many, many more employers to this agenda, like we have seen on issues like race, I think is going to be really important.
One of the questions points we've got in here, and I'm trying to sort of pick them up if you haven't picked them up. One of them is around the sort of recruitment space and how we can get and ensure sort of recruitment recognises the skills individuals have well, and clearly recruitment in terms of age is an age discrimination real challenge, and I think you all know we've been doing at ILC experimenting with blind recruitment, where every question is designed in such a way that we don't see CVs, we don't know who people are. It's designed to test whether someone can do the job. So actually there are some innovations in that space that potentially could tackle discrimination and allow people who might have skills in a different space to be coming back. But there are other thoughts about at the recruitment stage about what we could do, what people could be doing and what employers could be doing in terms of helping people highlight the skills they have?
So certainly there's things you can do around advertising and the language you use when you're describing the jobs and the opportunities. So we've certainly done a lot of work at Phoenix around how we describe jobs and adverts and making sure that we're not using unintentionally ageist language or language that unintentionally implies that we're looking for people in a certain age bracket. And absolutely there's then things you can be doing. We're in a trial at the moment run through the Behavioural Insights team and the Centre for Ageing Better, looking at the recruitment process itself, the sort of interview process, and how you can eliminate bias, age bias, from that process. So I definitely think there are things we can do.
But I think it is, to sort of pick up the point you made, it is about more, there's those processes, but I think there's also some of the things about, well, how do we describe the skills for a job, and how can we kind of broaden our understanding of that? And the other thing is obviously flexible by default is massively important. And I think, clearly the change towards home working and hybrid working in the pandemic enabled a lot of people to work in ways that suited them. I'm going to be sharing some research that I've done soon that looks at kind of its impact on relationships, but there's lots of other ways that that's impacted really positively. And I think, I find it quite depressing that we're sort of reverting back away from all of those changes and those shifts, because flexible by default needs to not be just about hours, but it's also about location, it's also about ways of working, styles of working. I think, being really clear about those things in recruitment processes makes a massive difference. And then there's also lots of other things you should do, like showing salaries and things like that, which is not necessarily an age thing, but important. Particularly, but it is important when people are coming into new fields and they don't know what the salary norms around a certain role are. Showing salaries is really, really important for diversity.
Absolutely. Okay, one final question. You've got 30 seconds. If you want to ignore this question and do something else, please feel free to. One of the things that's come out, a question from here, one of the things that came out with post-COVID was, of course, all these young people should have to go back to the office because they can learn from older people, and vice versa. There's been some of the message that's been coming out around the sort of re-smog arguments about getting back to the office. And I suppose I'm interested in, from an ILC point, the intergenerational issues here, the learning across generations. So if you want to pick that up, please do. If you want to, your final comment, say something completely different, please do. Who wants to kick off? Go on, Kate.
Can I have my intergenerational rant? I hate the term intergenerational because we use it to mean young people and old people, like they're two weird breeds that we bring together and some magic happens. And I'm just not keen, because actually, we really should be talking about age diversity and that should just be normal. We shouldn't have to have a special word for when we mean that people of different ages are together. I know that we do probably have to do some work to get to that place, but I find this sort of idea that we shouldn't be pretending there's a magic when young people and old people get together. There's a magic when people get together in all their diversity. Rant stopping, at least not over probably.
I mean, I think this is a very live issue that lots of organisations and employers are grappling with at the moment in terms of how do you maximise the benefits of being in kind of shared workspaces whilst also, take the opportunities and benefit from the opportunities that remote working brings. And I think, lots of organisations are still grappling with that and trying to figure out how that works best. But there is a huge opportunity in terms of, we don't want to lose the benefits that being in kind of shared workspaces brings in terms of, learning, productivity, innovation, all of those things. But I guess it's also kind of not losing the flexibility that brings. And, I think it's a hugely important point in terms of, attracting people back into the workplace. And I think Timewise have said that only 1 in 4 jobs advertised say anything about flexibility. So I do think it's a hugely important point, and, there's an opportunity to make the most of remote working.
I'll pick up with that flexibility point, if I may, and totally agree. I think that's absolutely critical. At Phoenix, we're going to be spending the next 12 months with Timewise doing trials of a 4-day week amongst all sorts of other things to see what we can do to embed greater flexibility. We do advertise for flex in all roles, but of course then how people then experience their jobs and what cultures line managers actually set in different teams can sometimes be different. But I think, so I suppose for me that your point about multi-generational working and teams just really highlights that you can do everything you might want to do to recruit people of all ages, but if you haven't got the working environments, and in large companies that doesn't just mean a really forward-thinking leader and HR department, it also means all the way through to every team and every line manager, then that working environment is not going to enable that person to stay for very long. And I think that's something that I was reading about the Now Teach program, and how some of the graduates of that program have experienced that. Schools really embracing the idea of recruiting them, but not actually providing the sorts of workplace cultures and environments that enable them to stay for very long.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I should just, we're actually going to give you time to finish your cup of tea and coffee this time. So have a slightly longer break. So we're just going to finish that. But huge thanks to Phoenix and all of our speakers. And as I mentioned, we're really working very closely with Phoenix. One thing to say for another Sally legacy was that ILC staff, up until the summer, we had staff in our paid staff in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s. And we were an organisation of 12 people. Frankly, if we can do it, there is no excuse for no one else to do it. So at that point, go and grab your coffee, and you might even have time to finish it this time. Thanks.